I'm Iain and welcome back to the Northland Workshop. Nothing says summer quite like relaxing in an Adirondack chair. However, Adirondack chairs are expensive to buy and they can be intimidating to build, especially if you don't have a bandsaw and a table saw. So today we're going to build this Adirondack chair right here with nothing but a circular saw and a jigsaw. So there's a couple nice features about this Adirondack chair. First of which is it has full 5.5 inch wide arms, so that way you can set a glass of your favorite beverage or a plate on here for a summertime barbecue. Also, it's got a curved seat, so that way it's more comfortable to sit in and you don't need to have a cushion for it. And it has a nice sloping back to again add to the relaxation. So if you would like to build this Adirondack chair, I'm going to have a set of plans in the description box below. If they aren't up when this video posts, they will be up within a week after it posts. I just have to put some finishing touches on them. And at the end of the video, I'm going to go over the steps I'm going to do to finish this. So let's get started on this Adirondack chair. So there are a lot of curved parts on this Adirondack chair, and the best way to lay them out is to print out some 1 inch by 1 inch graph paper and then take the drawings from the plans that will be down in the description box, if not right when this video is published, a week after this video is published. So check back there for the plans, but you'll find the plans and then all you have to do is just scale them up to inch by inch squares like so, and then you can go and make templates. Now these templates I made, this is the front leg, this is the back support, this is the bracket for the arm, the leg assembly, and the front cross member on the chair are all made out of 1/4 inch plywood. You can use any kind of sheet material you want. I recommend making it out of sheet material and not regular wood because regular wood tends to warp. You can also just glue the pattern directly to the piece of wood you're going to be cutting, but one thing I found with Adirondack chairs is you never end up making just one Adirondack chair, and you can keep these templates forever and make as many chairs as you want. So what I've done is I've taken some spray adhesive and I've sprayed the back of this pattern and I've sprayed that piece of plywood. The directions on the can say for removable stencils to spray it on both pieces and let it just get tacky. Once it's tacky, I can go ahead and stick it down. And I want to be real careful that I get it lined up with the long edge. This is the pattern for the arm, and so there's one long edge right here. I want to make sure that's lined up. Once it is, you just want to go along and press out any of the air bubbles. Now by doing the technique of spraying both pieces and letting it get tacky, in theory what I can do is once I cut it out, I should be able to peel the paper back off. First thing I want to do is cut the blank to length right along this line. And I could try to do it with the jigsaw, but I don't have very good luck making straight cuts with the jigsaw. It's much easier to do it with my little trim saw. So what I'll do is line it up with the line and make the cut. I'm staying just to the waist side of the line because I'm going to be able to sand it down to the line in just a little bit. But if I go over the line, it's much harder to add wood back to it. Now I need to sand the template down to the line. You can do it with just a block of wood and some sandpaper if that's all you have. But if you happen to have a drill press, even a little benchtop drill press, you can get an inexpensive set of drum sander attachments that simply go in the drill press and turn it into a drum sander. So that's what I'm going to use for this project because there are a lot of curves to sand on an Adirondack chair. With the kit that you get, it'll tell you the optimum RPM for different size drums. So you want to set the speed of the drill press to match that recommended RPM. You'll notice something interesting with this drum sander attachment, and that is I can't get it all the way down onto the table because if I do, it's going to rub on the cast iron table and that could damage the table, and it's just not going to work real well if it's rubbing on it. So I get it as close as I can, but I need some way to hold the workpiece up because if we take a look at this template, it can slide right under the drum, so that's no good. Well, what I did is I took a scrap piece of 3/4 inch plywood and cut out a U-shape with the jigsaw. And that is big enough for the biggest drum sander attachment that I have. So any of the smaller ones will also fit in it. And all I do is I just put it on the drill press table and I just hold it in place with a spring clamp. And with that, we can sand this template. The nice thing about having these plywood templates made up in advance is it allows me to move them around the piece of wood to avoid knots and other defects that otherwise I might not notice if I was trying to glue a paper pattern to it. Then once I have it where I want, all I have to do is just trace out the shape. The ideal tool for cutting out these curved parts is definitely the bandsaw. And if you're going to be making a whole bunch of Adirondack chairs, I recommend investing in one. However, not everybody has a bandsaw, but just about everybody has a jigsaw. So I'm going to be cutting it out with the jigsaw today. Now what I'll do is flip the workpiece around and finish the cut from the other direction. There's a 24.5 degree cut on the bottom of the side piece that forms the foot for the Adirondack chair. Up at the front there's another angled cut that attaches to the front rail, and there's one flat cut partway through where the back attaches. All of those could be cut with the jigsaw, but it's hard to get a straight cut with it. What I'm going to use instead is my little circular saw. I need to make 2 of these little brackets to support the arms on the Adirondack chair. And I find this part is an ideal way to use up some scrap wood that would otherwise go to waste. In this case, I have this 1x4 right here, and by flipping this over, I can get both brackets out of this one little piece of wood. The way I'm going to do it is just like before, clamp it to the workbench and then cut it out with the jigsaw halfway or until I run into the clamps, and then I'll flip it over and complete the cut starting from the other end. Now before I flip it around, I want to make the cut on the other one as far as I can, because if I cut this one out entirely, it's going to be just way too small to try and hold this thing safely to cut out the second. Each front leg needs a notch to receive the front cross member, and to cut that notch I'm going to use my jigsaw in combination with my speed square. That way I get nice straight square edges of the notch, and then I'll be able to remove the waste. With the ends cut, now what I can do is cut that way in a straight line. Once that section's removed, start the saw from that end and go this way. Watch. I think that's going to fit fine. Now it's time for a little bit of assembly. And the first thing I want to do is spread a little bit of this clear marine adhesive on the notch for the leg. This will do a couple things. One, because it's an adhesive, it'll help glue this together. And also, it'll act as a sealant to help water from getting into the joints and hopefully extend the life of this chair just a little bit. So that is 33 and just under an 8. And this is 33 and just under an 8. So that's perfect right there. Now what I can do is drill and countersink for some exterior grade screws. I'm using a router with a 1/4 inch rounding over bit to ease the edges of the chair, so that way it makes it more inviting because nobody likes to touch sharp edges, and also the paint will stick better to it if the edges are eased over. I don't want to ease the edges where the seat slats are going to go, so I won't do this edge, but I will do all the other edges. If you don't have a router, don't worry. You can do the same thing with a block of wood and some sandpaper. It'll just take a little longer. So I've applied some of the marine adhesive to this side of the seat support, and now what I'm going to do is put it in place, butt it up to the front cross member, and just clamp it in place with a quick clamp. The key here is to line up this top edge. Now what I want to do is pre-drill for a couple screws right in the front, and that'll lock the angle in place. Again, you want to take your time and make sure that top edge is flush with the front support. Now I can go ahead and pre-drill for the bottom screw. With the angle locked in, I can go ahead and drill through these holes for the bolts. Here I'm using 1/4 inch carriage bolts, 2 inches long, to secure the legs. And then on the back, I'll put a flat washer, a lock washer, and a nut. And when I tighten this down, I want to just tighten it down enough so that I see the wood start to compress behind the flat washer and the head of the carriage bolt. I don't want to crank it down too much because that's just going to pull the head right through the wood. I just drew a line that is where the edge of this support piece needs to be in order to have it centered on this leg. You'll also notice that I drew a center line down it, and I drilled some holes for the screws. I find it's easier to start drilling the holes from this side and then countersink them on the back. That way I get everything lined up with the bracket. This adhesive makes everything want to slide around, so clamps really aren't optional for assembling this thing. The top screw is 1 5/8 inches, the bottom screw is 1 1/4 inches. If we look at the template, you'll see that that right there is not a 90-degree end. It's actually a 6-degree cut, and that's to account for the 6-degree angle of the back. Now, if you don't have the template, but you have a speed square, you can lay out a 6-degree cut. What you do is you put the speed square on where you want the cut to be, and it says pivot right in the corner. If you look along here, these marks aren't inches, they're actually degree marks. They're inches along this edge, degrees along this edge. It allows you to pivot the thing. So if I pivot it until the edge of the board registers 6 right here, this is now a 6-degree angle. So if I mark this 6-degree angle right here, and I compare it with the one on the template, you'll see the two line up perfectly. So if you don't have the template made, or you're in the process of trying to make the template, you can use a speed square to get your 6-degree angle, or any angle for that matter. Now it's time to assemble the back support frame. And that goes together just like everything else. A little bit of marine adhesive and some countersunk 1 5/8" screws. Now these screws don't have to be countersunk as much because I'm not going to be plugging these holes. These holes are going to be behind the seat slat, so nobody's ever going to see them. You still want to countersink them so that way the heads don't interfere with the back slats, but we don't have to go so far as to get a plug in there. Now if you've taken your time cutting these notches, this thing should go together pretty easily. It should pretty much square itself up. That's looking pretty good. Yep. So now I can go ahead and drill the holes. So I'm starting on what is the trickiest part of this whole chair making operation, and that is attaching this back support frame to the actual legs of the chair. And it's tricky because I got to line up both sides at the same time and clamp it. But I think with a little bit of luck, I should be able to do this. So I marked 16¼ inches back from the inside of the front leg, and that's where I want to line this thing up with, so that way all the seat slats turn out the way they're supposed to. And I'm just going to take a spring clamp for the time being, put that right there, and I've got a mark on the opposite side. I'm going to put spring clamp right there. Now I can go ahead and fine-tune, fit up this side. Now I'm using the 6-degree cut on the bottom of this back support as my reference to get the angle right. Again, it might take a couple tries to get it dialed in. Put a clamp there, come over to the other side, get that set, and so forth, but if I take my time, it should come out okay. I want to install the armrest on the Adirondack chair, but there's an issue. It's really hard to hold it in place when the back end is totally unsupported. So the easiest way I've found to fix that is to take the template for the front legs and a spring clamp and simply clamp it to the back leg. Because it's a perfect replica of the front leg, it's the correct height, and that acts as the back support for the armrest. What I've done is I've pre-drilled the holes where they're supposed to be. The way I laid them out was to put this thing in place and then trace around this and drill the holes from the back side, flip it over, and countersink it. Now what I can do is go ahead and put some of the marine adhesive on the mating surfaces, and we can start attaching it. Now I can go ahead, put the armrest back on, lining it up with the pencil marks I made earlier. And I'm going to clamp it to this back support. Now I can drive one screw in from the back. And I can now focus on the front. Once again, lining it back up with the pencil marks. Now this connection back here is going to be under a lot of stress anytime somebody leans back in the chair, which is all of the time. So I don't want to just rely on screws. I also want to put in a 3-inch carriage bolt. So to do that, I'm going to take the brad point bit and just kind of center it right in the arm support and drill a hole. You want to back the bit out fairly frequently to clean out the sawdust. There. Now I can go ahead and install the carriage bolt just like I did for the rest of the bolted connections. With the first of the back slats in position, you can see that I'm going to have to notch these if I want it to stick out all the way flush with this edge, which is what I want. So to do that, I've got it where I want it, and I'm just going to mark with my pencil where the notch needs to be for the armrest and for the side support. Now I can go and cut the notch. I set the blade on my trim saw equal to 3/4 of an inch because that's the depth I want the notch to be. Now what I can do is very carefully cut along those lines and then nibble away the material in the middle, giving me a notch. After snapping the waste pieces off, I'll clean up the rest of it with a chisel. Because I'm chiseling across the grain in this situation, I don't want to push the chisel all the way through because that could tear out on the back side. Instead, I want to chisel just to the halfway mark, and then I'll flip it end for end in the bench vise and chisel into the center from the other way. That way I prevent any tear out on that edge. The notch at the end starts out with the saw set the exact same way. I've now maxed out the cutting depth on my little circular saw, and I'm going to cut this part of the bottom notch. I don't want to cut past this cut because then there'll be a big kerf mark right here. So I'm going to cut right up to it, and I'll finish that cut by breaking it off and then just chiseling whatever's left. So I stopped right there. Now I'm just going to carefully pop it off in this direction. I don't want to tear out the back end. And now you can see I broke that part off. I can just take the chisel and clean up what's left right there. So I've put some adhesive right where it's going to intersect with the cross members. And you'll notice that I didn't put a whole bunch of glue right along the back piece, just in the middle. The reason for that is I want these pieces to be able to expand and contract with changes in humidity, because around here the summers are very humid. The other thing worth noting is that I'm using 1¼ deck screws for this. The reason for that is the 1 5/8 would stick through this cross member, and that wouldn't be good. I've got this 3/4 inch thick scrap piece of wood leaned up in here, and I'm going to use that as the spacer to center the middle back slat right there. So that's a 3/4 inch gap, and this is a 3/4 inch gap. Now I can go ahead and screw it in place. It's time to start installing the seat slats, and all the seat slats got a round over on the front and the back edge, except the frontmost seat slat also got a round over on the front bottom edge. So 3 of the corners have been rounded over just to make it a little nicer right on the front, because this is actually going to overhang by 1/4 inch. So what I want to do is take some glue, and I'm just going to put a real narrow bead all the way along this front stretcher. Just for a little bit of added reinforcement, since this front slat is going to take the bulk of the abuse. Then a little bit of adhesive on either edge. I can go ahead and slip this seat slat into place. I've got my little combination square set to 1/4 inch. So what I'll do is take the dead blow mallet, just tap it in until it overhangs 1/4 inch. Okay, it's good on that side. And it's got just a little bit more to go over here. There. Now with that set, I can go ahead and hold it in place permanently with some screws. Double check that it's still 1/4 inch in the middle, and it is. And then one screw over there. Now the rest of them will simply get adhesive on the ends. To get the spacing to be uniform, I'm going to use some 5/16 dowels. If you don't have a bunch of 5/16 dowels kicking around, you can use little scraps of wood. I just found these were handy. I'm now trimming off the little wooden plugs that I glued in yesterday to fill up the screw holes, and that'll keep it from collecting water down in the counter bores, and also it'll keep it from rusting and staining the paint job. You can get little wooden plugs for whatever size countersink bit you have in little bags at the home center. But if you have a drill press, there's an even cheaper way that you can make your own plugs. If you have a drill press and you want to save a little bit of money, you can buy a plug cutter that will make the wooden plugs, and then you have the freedom of making as many as you want out of whatever types of wood you want. And all a plug cutter is, I've got a bigger one right here, is essentially a hollow tube with a cutting edge on it, and the inside diameter of that hole gives you that size plug. So all I do is choose the appropriate size plug cutter for the countersink bit I was using, and I can make as many plugs as I want. Once I have a bunch of the plugs cut, I can pop them out of their holes using a flat tip screwdriver. Once I trim the plugs off with this little flush cut saw, I use a block of wood wrapped with some 120 grit sandpaper to sand the plugs flush. Because this is a pine outdoor project, really the only thing that's going to give it a fighting chance at lasting any length of time is to paint it. But pine has a lot of knots, and those knots tend to bleed through the finish paint coat. So what I want to do first is to seal the knots with this shellac based primer. Once this dries, I'll go and prime the entire chair with a regular primer, and then give it 2 coats of paint, and it should be good to go. With the spot primer dried, I'm now applying a coat of latex exterior wood primer. And unfortunately, the paint mixing machine at my local hardware store is out of order right now, so I wasn't able to pick up the paint color I was looking for. So this will be it for this series. I hope you've enjoyed seeing how to build an Adirondack chair with a circular saw and jigsaw. Until next time, I'm Iain Portalupi for the Northland Workshop.